Imagine a future where humanity has become a true spacefaring civilization, expanding across the stars, establishing thriving colonies, and making contact with alien species. For centuries, science fiction had painted a hopeful picture of first, contact, mutual understanding, peaceful alliances, and a grand union of civilizations working together to explore the cosmos. But reality had a far darker tale to tell. Because when humanity finally reached out into the void, it didn't find friends. It found predators. It began with the Parian conflict, an event that would go down in history as the war that changed everything. Before the war, the Parians were a name only whispered among the few human explorers who had encountered their ruins, traces of an empire that had once spanned vast regions of space. No one knew why they had vanished from historical records, but the answer became terrifyingly clear when they reappeared. And they weren't just alive. They were watching. The first sign of trouble came from the Eridani colony, a thriving human settlement on the outer edges of known space. A beacon of human ingenuity, Eridani had grown into a bustling trade hub, its orbital stations brimming with merchant fleets and scientists studying the strange, uncharted depths of the frontier. Then, in the span of a single day, it was gone. Every transmission cut off, every distress signal silenced. At first, Earth's governing bodies assumed a catastrophic accident, perhaps a stellar event or some unknown cosmic anomaly. But when a deep space survey ship was sent to investigate, the horror of what had happened was revealed. The colony wasn't just destroyed, it had been purged, millions of human lives, erased with cold, mechanical precision. The buildings? Vaporized. The ships? Shattered debris floating in the void. But the worst part? The bodies. There were none. Not a single trace of the people who had once called Eridani home. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. And then, the message arrived. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a demand for surrender. The Parians had no interest in diplomacy. Their message was simple. You were a mistake. And mistakes must be corrected. It was the first and only time they ever communicated with humanity. Because the very next day, their fleets arrived. Massive, terrifying warships, bristling with alien weaponry beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, descended upon human space in a coordinated strike. They didn't attack strategic targets. They didn't seize resources or claim territory. Instead, they did something far worse. They erased entire worlds. The Ragnarok Offensive, as it would later be called, was swift and absolute. Within the first week, 4 major colonies were wiped from existence. The attacks weren't just overwhelming, they were surgical. Every military outpost, every fleet, every planetary defense system was bypassed with an almost mathematical precision. The Parians didn't fight like conquerors. They fought like an extermination force, their only objective being the complete and total erasure of humanity. And for a while, it seemed like they would succeed. The United Earth Navy, the pride of humanity's expansion into space, was shattered in the opening battles. Entire fleets were lost without a chance to fight back. The most advanced human warships, designed for traditional fleet combat, were utterly useless against the Parians' nightmare technology. Their weapons bypassed shields. Their ships moved in ways that defied physics. Their AI-driven tactics adapted in real time, countering every desperate human attempt to resist. On Earth and Mars, panic set in. The High Command was paralyzed, unable to coordinate a response to an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Political leaders scrambled for solutions, debating whether humanity should surrender, though no one knew if the Parians would even accept surrender. And as the worlds burned, a terrifying realization took hold. This wasn't just an invasion. This was extinction. But the Parians had made a critical mistake. They thought humanity would break. They thought, like so many other species before, that humans would collapse under the sheer weight of their technological superiority. They thought that fear alone would shatter humanity's will to fight. They were wrong, because when faced with annihilation, humanity did what it had always done throughout history. It adapted, it evolved, and most of all, it prepared for war. The battle for survival had begun. The turning point, humanity's desperation and the rise of total war. The first weeks of the war were nothing short of catastrophic. Every attempt to fight back ended in disaster. The Parians didn't just outgun humanity. They outthought us. Their warships were like ghosts, phasing in and out of real space, striking with terrifying precision, and vanishing before human forces could respond. They didn't engage in prolonged battles. They executed swift annihilations, entire fleets wiped out before they could even fire a shot. For the first time in history, humanity faced an enemy it had no idea how to defeat. Earth's high command was in chaos. The political elite, accustomed to diplomacy and economic conflicts, had no framework for dealing with an enemy that had no interest in negotiation. Surrender was briefly considered, but quickly discarded when it became clear that the Parians weren't here to conquer. They were here to erase. The destruction of the Olympus colony, one of Mars's largest off-world settlements, cemented this reality. Nearly 10 million people, gone in an instant. The colony itself wasn't just destroyed. It was scrubbed from existence, as if it had never been built. Desperation took hold. Humanity was on the verge of collapse, but history had already proven one undeniable truth about the human species. The moment you push it to the brink, when survival seems impossible, that's when humanity becomes its most dangerous. The birth of the scorched earth doctrine. The first major shift in strategy came not from Earth, but from a scattered group of military engineers, AI researchers, and rogue commanders operating out of the shattered remnants of the outer colonies. With traditional warfare proving ineffective, these desperate survivors proposed something radical: complete and total asymmetrical warfare. If the Parians wouldn't fight like a traditional military force, then neither would humanity. The doctrine they developed was brutal. Survival at all costs. No more defensive battles. No more holding the line. If humanity was to survive, it had to make the cost of extermination too high for even the Parians to endure. Every remaining warship was retrofitted with scorched earth protocols, self-destruct charges, AI-controlled suicide runs, and experimental weapons that ignored ethics in favor of efficiency. Anything that could be weaponized. Asteroids, abandoned space stations, even the husks of destroyed colonies, was converted into a tool of destruction. The first test of this strategy was the Battle of Helios Rift. A Parian fleet of over 200 warships moved to eradicate what they thought was a defenseless human evacuation fleet, but instead of helpless civilians, they found something else waiting for them. A trap. Hidden within the drifting debris of destroyed ships were planet cracker warheads, a last-ditch human invention designed to simulate the force of a planetary extinction event. The moment the Parian fleet entered the kill zone, the warheads detonated. The resulting explosion tore through their ships like paper, wiping out half the fleet in seconds. For the first time in the war, a human victory. The news spread like wildfire. Hope, once extinguished, flared back to life. If the Parians could be killed, then they could be defeated. The war transformed overnight. Military commanders, once bound by outdated tactics, embraced total war. There was no more honorable combat. There were no rules. Every battle became a test of who was more ruthless, more relentless, and more willing to do the unthinkable. The Black Projects, weapons of humanity's vengeance. As the war shifted, so did human ingenuity. While Earth's governments scrambled to coordinate a resistance, off-the-books research facilities deep in the industrial zones of Mars and Titan began working on something else entirely. Weapons designed to not just fight the Parians, but to annihilate them. These projects operated outside political oversight, funded by rogue generals, corporate war profiteers, and even the black markets of the outer colonies. The result? The most terrifying war machines humanity had ever built. The GIM Retribution-class dreadnoughts. These weren't just warships. They were floating fortresses of destruction. Each one was designed to be a mobile apocalypse, armed with enough firepower to level entire fleets. And unlike standard human battleships, these behemoths were built for suicide missions. If one was ever lost in battle, its onboard AI would activate Scorched Earth Protocol, triggering a cascade of antimatter detonations that would drag the entire enemy fleet into oblivion. The Revenant Squadrons. When standard pilots were no longer enough, humanity turned to something darker. These were not human pilots, but uploaded consciousnesses, former soldiers who had volunteered to have their minds permanently integrated into combat drones. They felt no fear. They required no rest. And their only purpose was to kill. The Omega virus, a last resort bioweapon, designed to attack the Parians at their very core. Unlike anything humanity had ever used before, this virus was built using stolen Parian biological data, and its purpose was horrifyingly simple. It erased their entire genetic structure. A single deployment could wipe out an entire species. The war had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. It was fighting for vengeance, and the Parians were about to learn the most horrifying truth of all. Humans don't fear extinction. They fear nothing. The true counteroffensive was about to begin. The counteroffensive, humanity strikes back. The moment the first major victory against the Parians was secured, humanity's transformation was complete. Fear had turned into rage. Desperation had become calculated fury. The war was no longer about survival alone. It was about retribution. The atrocities committed by the Parians, the erasure of entire human colonies, the billions lost in fire, and silence. It all fueled a level of total war the galaxy had never seen before. The Parians had underestimated humanity. They saw a species in its infancy, barely capable of interstellar travel, and assumed extermination would be swift and absolute. What they didn't account for was the one thing that had defined human history across millennia: adaptation through warfare. When threatened with destruction, humanity didn't just defend itself, it evolved. It became something worse. With the Scorched Earth Doctrine in full effect, humanity launched its first major counteroffensive, a campaign of relentless, unyielding brutality that shattered everything the Parians had built. The Battle of Draconis. Void, the first great retaliation. Deep in uncharted space lay Draconis Void, a massive Parian military hub and one of their primary forward operating bases. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by automated defense grids, and protected by a massive fleet of Parian warships. It was considered untouchable. Humanity touched it anyway. The assault force consisted of Omega Fleet, a collection of experimental warships designed with one goal: obliteration. The fleet's core was the Retribution-class dreadnoughts, each loaded with enough antimatter warheads to wipe entire moons from existence. They were escorted by Revenant squadrons, the terrifying AI-driven fighter swarms piloted by the digital ghosts of fallen soldiers. But the true horror of the assault came from a new, untested weapon: the Nemesis Protocol. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a plague of annihilation. Developed in the darkest corners of human military research, Nemesis was an AI-driven nanite swarm designed to infiltrate and rewrite enemy technology on a molecular level. Unlike traditional cyber warfare, which relied on hacking or signal disruptions, Nemesis worked by physically reprogramming matter itself. Any Parian ship or structure it touched was instantly corrupted, turned against its own fleet. The battle began as expected. The Parians detected the incoming human fleet and responded with overwhelming firepower. But then, the Nemesis swarm deployed. Parian warships began turning on each other. Defense grids suddenly shut down. Entire command structures collapsed into chaos. The Parians, once an unstoppable force, found their own weapons ripping through their fleets. Within hours, Draconis Void, once the heart of their war machine, was nothing more than a graveyard. But humanity wasn't finished. The surviving Parian warships attempted to retreat. They were not allowed to. For every human colony that had been erased, the surviving human fleet hunted down every last Parian survivor. No mercy, no negotiations. The exterminators had become the exterminated. The war turns in humanity's favor. With the destruction of Draconis Void, the Parians lost their strategic foothold, but more importantly, they lost their confidence. For the first time, they began to fear. Fear is a uniquely human weapon, one that had driven empires to rise and fall across Earth's history. Now, it was humanity's greatest tool against the Parians. The war shifted from survival to psychological dominance. Humanity didn't just want to win, it wanted to make the Parians suffer. To ensure the message was clear, the next phase of war wasn't fought in space. It was fought on their worlds. The first target? Zalturis, a Parian core world. This was where humanity abandoned all remaining morality. The invasion of Zalturis, terror unleashed. The Parians had never been invaded before. Their worlds had always been protected by their unmatched technology and their near-flawless military strategies. No species had ever even attempted to strike at their home. But humanity was different. The invasion began with a planet-wide blackout. Every power grid, every communication network, every defense system shut down in an instant. Then came the bombardments, massive, kinetic strikes that cracked the planet's surface, sending tidal waves and firestorms across entire continents. But the worst was yet to come. When human ground forces landed, they didn't come with the intent to conquer. There were no demands, no ultimatums, no offers of surrender, only death. Entire cities were leveled. Any Parian resistance was met with overwhelming force. The very same extermination tactics used against humanity were now turned against their creators. Parians that once viewed humans as nothing more than insects were now begging for their lives. But humanity had long since lost its mercy. The footage of Zalturis's destruction was broadcast across every Parian system. The message was clear. You wanted war? Now you will drown in it. The Parians had started this war. But humanity was going to finish it. And now, for the first time in their history, the Parians did something unthinkable. They retreated. But humanity wasn't finished yet. This war wouldn't end with a ceasefire. It wouldn't end with diplomacy. It would only end when the Parian species ceased to exist. The final phase of humanity's vengeance was about to begin. The final campaign, extinction or surrender. The Parians had finally realized the horror they had unleashed upon themselves. They were no longer fighting an enemy struggling to survive. They were fighting an enemy that would not stop. Humanity had abandoned its past notions of mercy, diplomacy, and restraint. The war had become an execution. In the wake of Zalturis's destruction, panic spread across the Parian dominion. Entire fleets fled from human-controlled sectors. Colonies were evacuated overnight. Worlds that once stood as symbols of unshakable Parian supremacy now fell silent, abandoned in terror of what was coming. But no matter how far they ran, no matter how many systems they abandoned, humanity pursued them. The strategy was simple: eradicate every last stronghold. With the overwhelming success of the Nemesis Protocol, humanity had developed an unstoppable war machine. Each invasion became faster, more precise, and more devastating. The Parians were being systematically erased. But something strange happened. The Parians, who had always prided themselves on their technological dominance, suddenly stopped resisting. Their fleets no longer engaged in full-scale battles. Their planetary defenses stood down. Their leadership, once defiant, vanished without a trace. This was not surrender. This was something else. The hidden fortress, the Parians' last stand. Human intelligence operatives intercepted a transmission from a Parian deep space relay. It contained coordinates to an unknown system, one that had never appeared on any stellar map. This was no mere outpost. It was something greater. The system, named Ygathra Prime, was deep within the galactic core, a region deemed uninhabitable due to its proximity to a massive pulsar. The sheer amount of radiation and gravitational turbulence should have made settlement impossible. And yet, this was where the Parians had gone. Reconnaissance missions confirmed the unthinkable. The entire remaining Parian species had retreated to a single, last-stand fortress world. This was their final gamble. The Parians had pooled every last warship, every last weapon, and every last living citizen into Ygathra Prime, turning it into a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Orbital defense platforms lined the system, automated weapon stations guarded every approach, and a planetary shield of unimaginable scale encased the entire world. It was clear what this was. They weren't just making a stand. They were waiting for humanity to come. The Siege of Ygathra Prime. A battle, unlike any other. The final battle of the war was not fought in days or weeks. It raged for months. humanity's first assault was met with catastrophic losses. The Parian defense grid tore through entire fleets before they could even breach orbit. Every approach was a death trap. Every attempt at infiltration met with overwhelming force. For the first time in years, humanity was stopped, but they didn't give up. Instead, the war strategy shifted. If a direct assault wouldn't work, then total isolation would. The blockade of Ygathra Prime began. No supplies in, no ships out. The human fleets surrounded the system like a noose, cutting off every lifeline the Parians had left. Weeks turned into months. Then came the final blow. The doomsday weapon. The end of a species, deep within humanity's most secretive military installations. Scientists had been working on one final weapon, something that would ensure total, irreversible victory. It was called Judgment Day. A planetary-scale graviton implosion bomb, a weapon capable of creating an artificial black hole at its detonation point. A weapon that didn't just destroy worlds, it erased them. This was not war anymore. This was genocide. The device was deployed into Ygathra Prime's atmosphere. The Parians realized what was happening too late. Their final fleet made one desperate attempt to break the blockade, but it was futile. The moment Judgment Day detonated, Ygathra Prime ceased to exist. The pulsar, which had once made the system dangerous, was now the weapon's trigger. Its gravitational field collapsed around the planet, pulling everything, every ship, every city, every last Parian, into the abyss. In a single moment, an entire species was wiped from existence. The war was over. Aftermath. A galaxy forever changed, with the Parians gone. The galaxy fell into absolute silence. The species that had once viewed humanity as insignificant now saw them as something else entirely, something to be feared. The Parian War had done something that no other conflict in history had accomplished. It made humanity the single most terrifying force in the known universe. No longer were they a young, unproven species. They were executioners. Entire civilizations swore neutrality or allegiance, unwilling to risk even the possibility of human wrath. Diplomatic negotiations no longer required force, only a reminder of what happened to the Parians. And as humanity expanded further into the stars, colonizing the ruins left behind by the war, one thing became clear: there would never be another war against humanity. Because no species was willing to risk what would happen if humanity ever decided to finish another war. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Final words. What would you have done? But now, the question remains. Was humanity's total annihilation of the Parians justified? Were they merely defending themselves? Or had they become the very monsters they once feared? What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more incredible stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The stars may be vast, but they will never forget the war that made humanity feared across the cosmos.